listening to the Eric Metaxas Show. It's the show everyone's talking about, but they really should be listening to it. Broadcasting from the Empire State Building because the Chrysler Building wasn't available. This is the Eric Metaxas Show. With your host, Eric Metaxas.
Holy guacamole. This is not only the Eric Metaxas Show, this is a very special moment in the life of the Eric Metaxas Show. And the idea that we are now going to talk about what's popularly known as Bigfoot, Sasquatch. I think a lot of people are thinking I'm kidding. Now, the fact of the matter is I'm always half kidding because even when I'm talking about the most serious things, we joke around. It's just my nature. Because I think the search for truth should be fun. And people can get awfully dour and angry and argumentative, and it's ridiculous. But what I find is that when people are talking about the big questions, and this is folks who know me from Socrates and the City, I love to talk about the big questions because I think we live in a culture where people really quickly take sides and they get angry, and then what happens is the actual search for truth dies because people are already invested. You know, instead of saying I'm open to whatever is true, they're not open to whatever is true. They're afraid that something might cause them to change their position. So they dig a ditch and they say, this is it. It's like trench warfare. And that's kind of where we live. And anytime you get to a subject that's controversial, that's where things are. And the subject of Bigfoot and Sasquatch, including with me, it's something that most people laugh at or they sneer at or they just think why? Because since the 70s, it's been this kind of smorgasbord of crazy stuff. It's attracted a lot of crazies and whatever. So anybody who ever took it seriously initially probably has dismissed it because you just hear about hoaxes and then you go on the internet and there's weird stuff and whatever. But I've seen a few things that have blown my mind, and I said, okay, let's look a little deeper. So, okay, now what happened to me in particular is that most folks know I graduated from Yale in 1984. I had a very dear friend at Yale, probably my best friend there, Christopher Noël. Chris is utterly brilliant, a writer, lives in Vermont, and we've stayed in touch over the years. Just delightful friendship, and we can't stop laughing when we get together, which could be a problem. But eventually we stop laughing and we have substantive conversations. And Chris, some years ago, got involved in this crazy world of sort of Sasquatch research. And of course, I was very skeptical, and I thought, come on, Chris, really? And over the years, he's shown me some stuff, and I'm just saying, listen, if it's nothing but entertaining and compelling, ladies and gentlemen, this is the cutting edge here. You've entered the freak zone. We're not afraid to talk about anything, including this, but you'll at least be entertained, and you can laugh at me. I don't care. Hey, let me ask you again. Do you think I care? No, I don't. So we're going to bring on the line my longtime friend, Christopher Noël, to talk about this. Have we got Christopher Noël on the line from Vermont?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
from the deep woods of northern Vermont.
The tick-infested woods. Wow. Yeah. Chris, thank you for coming on the show. Now, this is something that people don't know. Michael Medved, the radio host off in the West Coast, has done a number of shows on this. And as I have come to see, there is infinitely more compelling information on this than I ever dreamt. So that's what freaked me out and kind of put me over the edge and said, I've got to talk to you about this because I've seen some videos and some dissections of videos that are so compelling. I said, even if I don't believe this is true, what do I make of these videos? So let me just ask you, first of all, what drew you into this? Because I don't even know that as friends we've ever discussed this.
Well, I was about 10 years old when I first came across this subject and this species. And it was when I saw the Patterson film, the famous Patterson film shot in 1967 in Northern California. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, well, that looks like an actual biological creature, not some human being pretending to be a genuine creature. And then the decades went by, and occasionally I would think, I've really got to do something about this underlying passion that I have. But I didn't, like most people, I didn't know there was a way to systematically study the subject and to kind of go after evidence. I thought it had to be a case of just incredibly good luck where you're driving down a lonely road in the middle of the night and you see one cross in front of you.
Right.
Or something of
maybe you
of
exchange cards and...
Yeah, right. But in fact, in 2005, just exactly 10 years ago this month, I found out that there was an organization called the BFRO, Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, that conducts expeditions that the public can go on, pay a little money and go on. And they take you to habitat that has a rich history of encounters and sightings of members of this species. And so I began going on those expeditions. In September of 2005, I went on 10 of them, all over North America. Well, not Canada, but all over the United States. And got to just kind of soak up all sorts of knowledge that had been gained over many years by veteran researchers who know that when you go out at night, there's a 95% chance that nothing will happen. But in that remaining 5% of the time, all sorts of very solid...
In these places where they go. I hear the bumper music, Mills Brothers. Therefore, we're going into a break. Now, I have to ask you, because we've known each other so long, you've got an amazing sense of humor, an amazing mind, and you've got a high, level of skepticism for nuts. Now, I have to imagine that some people involved in this are a little on the nutty side, and that some people are not. What was your experience when you first leapt into this?
Well, it's exactly so, but I expected a higher percentage of nuts, frankly. And the people who take the trouble don't just sit there behind their keyboards, but people who take the trouble, and it is a lot of effort to drive 500 miles or take an airplane to these sites in various locations around the country that have a long history of sightings of Sasquatch, and spend money and have to buy all sorts of equipment and undergo the physical strain of staying out till 2 in the morning, in the dark and the cold. They're not likely to be just feeble characters. These are people who have a stake, an emotional and intellectual stake in learning more about the species and their behavior.
Now, you keep saying species, so there's no question in your mind that this is an actual species.
Yeah, the first thing to get to sweep away is some people who haven't looked into this topic at all think that there's one Bigfoot.
The idea that when we say big, that's why Sasquatch is better, because when you say Bigfoot, people it's like Santa Claus. Like, is Bigfoot here?
I know. I prefer the term Sasquatch because that emerges. It's a sort of a transliteration of the British Columbia Native people's word for this creature.
Right.
But yeah, there's kind of two Bigfoots or two Sasquatch. One is this eminently lampoonable cartoon figure that shows up in tabloids and cartoons.
Jack Link's beef jerky commercials.
Yeah, exactly. That comes to mind, although those are pretty good. Yeah. And the other is this actual animal that people see, tens of thousands of people have seen over the last couple centuries of documented accounting in North America and indeed throughout the world, where there are many different names for them. So it's not a single creature. That would be absurd. They couldn't live that long, right. And they wouldn't be able to reproduce.
Wait, but this brings up the question in the beginning. And forgive me for we'll just have a sloppy kind of free for all here, because I was going to say that whether you answer it now or not, I just want to say for the viewers, the initial question most people have in their mind is, wait a second, if thousands of people have seen these things, and if there are in fact so many of them, why hasn't one, been found in a ditch and hauled into a lab and photographed? Why haven't there been better photos? Or why that's, of course, my question and Greg's question. And everybody has to...
Every rational person.
Every rational person has to wonder, how is it possible?
Right. And I go at this usually by saying that there are only two possibilities in this thing. One is that they don't exist, in which case all these tens of thousands of very straightforward witness accounts by people, many of whom want to remain anonymous so far that they are not trying to gain anything. They don't want to be ridiculed, so they don't even want their names used. They just come forward to researchers and say, you might want this information. So all of those tens of thousands of first-person reports are false, as is all of the accumulated wisdom of Native American peoples, most of which have these figures in their oral histories. Or Sasquatch does exist, And if they do exist, they've only been able to survive alongside our pretty bloodthirsty and domineering species.
Speak for yourself, but go ahead.
By being far more elusive than we are even equipped to conceive of. Those are the only two possibilities, because if they were less elusive, less masterful at remaining hidden and remaining indeed not even believed in by most people, they would have been discovered centuries ago, just like the mountain gorillas and chimpanzees have been discovered. The reason they're able to be so elusive has to do, we don't know all the answers. In fact, what we don't know about this species far outweighs what we do know. But the reason that they've been able to pull off this miraculous evasiveness has to do with the fact that they are genetically a combination between human beings and another primate species, probably in the genus Homo, which is our genus. So they combine animal cunning and wile, W-I-L-E, with human intelligence.
There's so much here. I think this is one of the reasons people don't get involved in talking about this, because it immediately explodes into 12 directions. That's kind of what I find appealing about it, actually, is that there's just so much to talk about. I mean,
well, I have a question just as a follow-up to that. I do think that a factor here is the average American does not really realize, especially people like us that live in New York City, how much of the country is forested. I mean, there are vast, vast swaths of America that are really uninhabited. And
far more of it is forested than was in the middle of last century.
Exactly.
Now, Chris, I just got to ask you, this is a shorter segment. You have had experiences, you claim, right? I believe you, but you claim that you have been in the near vicinity of this creature. What is the most compelling of those that you could share with us right now?
There's two, but for this segment, I'll confine myself to the first one, which was in 2009. I mentioned a little bit earlier that I went on these expeditions throughout the country, and on these expeditions I began hearing about another way of going about studying this creature. Instead of just going to places that have a history of sightings and then kind of taking a stab in the dark on a random night in a random part of the woods and hoping to elicit responses, vocalizations or knocks or other kinds of responses from members of this species, I found out that there's another better avenue to learning about this, which arises from the fact that they sometimes will become familiar with particular people's properties and homes. And they will make their presence known in understandably oblique ways, because they don't come up on the porch and have a cigarette or a cup of coffee, of course, or else this whole thing would have been blown wide open.
The idea of a caffeinated Bigfoot is frightening.
Instead, they will toss pebbles on the roof in the middle of the night. They will slap the outside wall of the house. They will throw sticks at windows. They will tap on windows.
Okay, now you've heard
why?
Why? And you've heard a lot of people say this.
It sounds like antisocial behavior.
They're a kindred species, and they are curious about us, but they can't allow themselves just to directly interact with us. So they do these indirect things. They make these overtures. This too is hard for people to accept, but after finding out more and more about these places that are known as habituation sites, where both the human beings and the Sasquatches become habituated or familiarized with a particular place and a particular mode of interaction, not in the daytime, almost never in the daytime, but usually between midnight and dawn, these things will happen. People see them standing and looking in the window sometimes. They freak people right out. People will see them if there's a moon out, they can see them hiding behind trees at the edge of the yard, often swaying back and forth and looking.
Now, how did you hear about these people, and how did you come in contact with the people who are claiming this?
Well, I heard about them just by others who were on expeditions, especially Matthew Moneymaker, who's the star of Finding Bigfoot on Animal Planet. He had come to find out about these habituation sites. So then I undertook to network and get connected with people who had been having these experiences. And I then corresponded with them and went to visit them. And the most fruitful of these sites was in East Texas, not too far from Mineola, Texas. And the woman who lived there, I don't use her real name because, like a lot of these folks, they don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want hunters suddenly appearing or photographers on their in their woods or on their yard. And so she became a good friend, and I went there a number of times. And I don't know how much time we have left in the segment. I have about a 3-minute story to tell you about the first.
Well, we probably got about 2 minutes, but just go, and we'll just.
I had the use of a thermal camera, which is a video camera that takes that reads heat rather than light. So it can take a creature's heat signature or a rock's heat signature, whatever retains heat or emits heat. So we were having a big bonfire, roasting marshmallows and hot dogs, and every now and then I would walk out of the firelight and kind of scan the tree line at the edge of the yard. Because
this woman had led you to believe...
She had reported many sightings and acoustical interactions with this creature. And I'd heard them knocking in the woods. They knock on trees.
I want to pause you there too, because there's so many things that you're so close to it. I want to make sure that my audience is kind of tracking. In reading your stuff and looking into this, part of what is claimed is that these creatures do this thing with a piece of wood knocking, that either they're communicating with each other, but it's this kind of bizarre thing of loud knocks, way too loud and too rhythmic or too clearly
not rhythmic, not like a woodpecker, not rhythmic. There'll be one or two.
But it's not the kind of thing that you would just say, oh, something crashed in the woods or a branch fell. It sounds, like with our minds, you listen to it and you think, but that's somebody. That couldn't just be random. We're going to another break here. We're going to be right back. This is so fascinating and so far-ranging, but boy, oh boy, when you see some of these videos, go to metaxastalk.com. Check it out for yourself, because there's no way in this conversation we're going to be able to cover a third of what I would like to cover. There is so much here, but go to metaxastalk.com. You be the judge, but you need to get a little bit educated probably before any of this sounds anything but nuts. But so you were just sharing with us that, and
I
think you understand how bizarre this sounds to some people. They're just thinking like, I don't know what they're talking about. So I want to make sure.
Let me get right to where people can concretely come up against this evidence themselves.
Okay.
So I was there. I was with a thermal camera, and I would scan it along the tree line.
Right.
Okay. So I didn't have a very good eyepiece in this contraption. I couldn't really tell what I was looking at. I saw kind of a horizontal bar of light, but I thought it must be a piece of metal or rock that had retained the heat of the day. And because what I was looking for was a gigantic upright figure hiding behind a tree. So
you mean when you're looking at
through the camera? Yes.
So but this is a thermal camera, so you're seeing something which is light, which indicates temperature.
Yes.
Okay. So it's different from the surrounding temperature, so it could be a live being. But you're saying it's just a bar. It doesn't look like a.
Yeah, it looked like a bar, so it didn't really register, and because it wasn't an upright standing creature like I was expecting. So. Cut to 2 weeks later or so, I went back to Vermont, and I was reviewing all the footage I had taken at this East Texas place, where the woman had for years had strange experiences with Sasquatch that I could go into in detail, but we won't have time. But if anyone's interested, you can read the book Our Life with Bigfoot.
You have such a sense of humor that when you title a book Our Life with Bigfoot, sounds like a joke title that you made up or I made up.
And I said I prefer the word Sasquatch, so I was just using that to kind of get readers who aren't familiar, who respond more to the word Bigfoot.
Our Life with Bigfoot. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Go ahead. So go ahead. We'll have all this stuff.
Knowing our next of kin at habituation sites, because these creatures are our next of kin.
You're freaking me out, but go ahead.
Planet. Yes.
Go ahead.
So I came back to Vermont, and I reviewed the footage, and there was that night's footage where we had the big bonfire. And it turns out that it was just 35 or 40 feet away was the tree line. And indeed, when I fiddled with the contrast, I saw that this bar of light was, in fact, a left arm reaching out. And if I looked over where the head and the body would be, it was behind a pile of lumber. But you could see two huge eyes peering out, because the eyes tend to light up.
So as if it's crouched down behind something.
Crouched down behind the wood pile. and eyes give out more heat than the rest of the face, especially if the rest of the face is covered with hair. So I could see this thing spying on us at the campfire through an opening in the woodpile. And indeed, many people have described that they've been spied on at fires. I tell you, they're curious. They want to see what we do, and we're just hanging out.
I mean, that seems to cut across or cut against the idea that they are maddeningly elusive. The idea that they would
extremely good at what they do. They're elusive 99.9% of the time, but as I mentioned, they have this inbuilt curiosity.
I guess what you're saying is that they can, even when they're creeping up on us, they're elusive. I mean, the idea that it's 45, 50 feet away and that nobody has any sense of it.
Either they don't exist, or if they do, they're able to do these things that we can't really grasp because they're so good at it. Anyway, so anyone wants to go and look at this video, it's called Woodpile Sasquatch.
Now, we're going to have links to all this stuff so folks can check. In fact, I ask people, please go and check this out, because don't take our word for it. This is a rambling conversation, and there's so much stuff to look at. Did you not have
if anyone is out there is a fan of the show Finding Bigfoot, this footage and I were featured on one of those episodes, so you can find out more that way.
Okay. Well,
it's called Lone Star Squatch.
This is like made up, Lone Star Squatch. Well, now, but did you not have an experience where you were in a tent or something and you felt one of them, breathing outside? I can't remember that now. A
lot of people have that. I didn't have that. I never use a tent when I camp out because I want to hear what's going on. But that same year, I was in a ravine not too far from me, and I was.
And this is in the woods of Vermont, and I've been up there, and it's like very, very wooded. It's amazing, yeah. So.
Yeah. So I was woken up by the sound of something circling me slowly, and it stayed circling me for 6 hours.
Okay, now stop there. Something circling me. You mean you hear an animal or something in the woods walking, crashing, whatever it is, loud enough that you know where it is, someplace in the dark.
Snapping sticks. And not the kind of snapping where like a deer is stepping on a stick and breaking it, or a twig, but rather snapping them like there'd be 3 snaps within a second, like snap, 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 like it's doing it with its hands. And it's going around and around, and every now and then it thumps on the ground, like boom, boom, boom.
Were you frightened?
I was initially fascinated and grateful because I wanted to have an encounter, but the longer this slow circling lasted, the more anxious I became.
I mean, after a couple of hours, I think I would freak out. I think I probably would say, "Mommy," that's my instinct. That if I get really scared,
it almost sounds like autistic behavior. Of this is something that severely autistic people do. They have these repetitious things that they do. Is there anything to that?
They're a very percussive species. They bang on the ground. They bang on trees. They will make sounds with their lips or tongue like. They will break sticks over and over and over. They will knock sticks together, and that's what I say around houses. Sometimes when they are used to a place, they'll throw pebbles again and again and again.
It's so funny because people who know a little bit about this haven't heard any of this. So we're going into some really new territory here. And I have to say, it is just crazy fascinating. The more I look into it, the more I'm just stunned, because I defy anybody to say, to tell me what this is. If it's not some kind of ape species that we haven't discovered, tell me what this is.
There were some scientists trying to figure out the Sasquatch riddle. Then they figured out it was a missing link. In search of Sasquatch with Leonard Nimoy kicking out the jams. He captured imaginations.
Okay, that's the worst bumper music we've ever had on the show. It's tough to find really good Sasquatch music, I am sorry to say. But I hope that changes. Sitting here with my friend Greg Thornbury and on the phone with my friend Christopher Noël, talking about the controversial, crazy subject of Sasquatch. Now, Chris, we've just got 4 minutes left in this hour. We're going to have you back because this is a long conversation. But right now, I've asked you, what's the most compelling evidence? And you always come back with the same thing, which amazes me. You say the 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film, the one we've all seen with this creature walking across. Why do you say that's the most compelling evidence? It's almost 50 years old. Why is that?
Well, I will tell you that in 22 seconds. But first, I want to just bridge from what I was saying, which is that I was in the ravine close to me 7 years ago, and then last summer in the same ravine, I began interacting with them, not visually, but very vividly, acoustically, and you can see that on YouTube in a video documentary that I made called Morning Visits.
Morning Visits, okay, and we'll be linked to that too. Chris Himes, my producer, will put that. Yeah, Patterson-Gimlin. Go ahead.
Film. The thing about that is that it's very easy for people to dismiss who don't want to try to look beyond the surface. Like if you see something that is walking upright and shaped like a human being, and you see that it is walking across a space into the distance, you think your first thought reflexively is, oh, that's a person. And if it's covered with hair, you think, oh, that's a person in a suit. But when you begin looking past the immediate data of that film, and you begin examining the muscle groups, the movements of the muscles, the proportions of the limbs, the mechanics, the biomechanics of the gait, you very quickly recognize that there is no possible way, even today, that a suit, unless it's computer generated, but this was in 1967, there's no way that this could be a person in a suit.
Right. That's what freaked me out is I saw videos where that video is examined. And
yes.
It is stunning. I mean, nobody, again, I say to anybody, listen, if you've got a better suggestion, let me know. But this has been extremely carefully dissected by film experts, and they come up with the same thing over and over and over. So what drives me crazy is why hasn't there been more public mention of this? Because
it drives me crazy because by all rights, this controversy would have been solved just on the back of that piece of footage. If you're feeling on the fence about the Patterson film and want to try to let yourself be persuaded, you can go. I have a compilation of the 7 most persuasive analyses of this film, and if you Google 7 most persuasive analyses of the Patterson film, you will find it.
My producer Chris Himes is has already put these video links on our website.
Okay.
I want to make it easy for people.
There and go through them. And
go to Metaxastalk.com because this is there's a lot here, and that's why on the one hand I hesitate getting into this subject because there's so many questions and things, but I just think it's fun. We should not be afraid of the truth. I say this, about my own faith. I say this about politics. Like, let's just look at the reality and the truth, and let's try to make up our minds without preconceived notions. And you can take all the time you want. So we're gonna try to continue the conversation. Christopher Noël, are you on the line, sir?
Yes, sir. I'm back.
Well, welcome. Thank you.
For another bite at this apple.
I'm sitting here in the studio here in the Empire State Building with Gregory Allen Thornberry, president of King's College, and we were talking that we want to bring up one thing that's very compelling. Greg, why don't I let you talk about that?
Well, I was doing my own research about this. Just in full disclosure, Eric was showing me some of these videos you were talking about week before last, and it's stuff that obviously I haven't seen. And so I've sort of been doing my own intuitive internet research. I was shocked to find that Jane Goodall, the world's leading primatologist, claims that Bigfoot or Sasquatch existed, and she did so on NPR's Talk of the Nation a couple of years ago. I mean, that seems to be a rather relevant endorsement, don't you think?
Yes, and she has endorsed the existence of Sasquatch even more full-throatedly in certain venues that I shouldn't be saying this, but she doesn't really want to be published.
Well, we're not on the air now, so don't worry about it. No. There are not millions of people listening, maybe just 100,000. So, and they're my friends. They're my friends.
I've heard that
there's another Jane Goodall. There's another Jane Goodall, very similar but different. But Chris, seriously, Jane Goodall is somebody that when you talk about primate research, she's the gold standard. This is not a woman who is she's not just some romantic. I mean, she's a scientist who's devoted her life to primate research. And by the way, gorillas are elusive as well. They're not as elusive as the Sasquatch creature if it exists, but for crying out loud, nobody has ever seen a gorilla. We think we've seen them because we've seen videos, we've seen them in zoos, but if you start wandering around Africa, you're not going to bump into gorillas very easily. And we forget how species that we take for granted are themselves elusive. So this is a woman who has studied them.
Remember, she's the chimpanzee woman. Diane Fossey was the gorilla woman. So just to clarify that.
That is very funny. I forgot. Yes, of course. How could I forget? And who's the orangutan woman?
Oh, she has an unpronounceable name.
And the gal with rhesus monkeys, who's that? No, it's just. But anyway, but the idea, Greg, that Jane Goodall has said this. That's exactly why I wanted to do this show, because I said I've never heard that. Jane Goodall, incredibly well respected,
right,
on National Public Radio, talking about her belief that this is an actual species that exists. That's extraordinary.
It's pretty amazing, and it raises a second question that I do want to ask Chris. You were a philosophy major in college, so the question then becomes, philosophers talk about presuppositions, things that can put blinders on people that will prevent them from reading evidence rationally and so forth. So in your experience with this circumstantial evidence and this body of evidence, what is it that makes people just say, oh, that's got to be a guy in a suit? What is that? Is it the fact that they don't want to believe in anything that's outside their immediate realm of experience? You're not a psychologist, and neither am I, but I'm curious as to why people might not be open to the question.
Well, there's the emotional side of it, which, as you suggest, comes in when people are just kind of spring-loaded against anything so radically different. People, by and large, don't want to believe in the Loch Ness Monster, but that's a lot less threatening than something that is our next of kin that lives in our own backyard, but has nevertheless eluded detection for centuries and millennia. That really gets us where we live, and people find it either magnetic or threatening of our human-centric worldview. And then there's the cognitive reason, which is that when you look at evidence, and there are a lot of videos out there besides the Patterson film. The Patterson film remains the gold standard, the 1967 film shot in Northern California, but when people look at that, they're only used to seeing human beings walking upright. So cognitively, we think that's a human being. It presses the human button on our brain.
Or you think that you're watching an episode of Abbott and Costello and it's a guy in a monkey suit.
Exactly.
We've seen this stuff over and over and over again. But it's now there are a number of really solid books on this subject. And again, I didn't know that any of these books existed. There's the one that I just read by
Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science, or Science Meets Legend, or something like that.
And what's
Legend Meets Science?
Who's the author of that?
Jeff Meldrum.
Meldrum?
Dr. Jeff Meldrum from Idaho State University.
Meldrum.
He's a physical anthropologist.
That book, Meldrum. Yeah, Meldrum. Jeff Meldrum, I was stunned at the level of science in this book. This guy, he's looking at stuff that, there are pages that my eyes glazed over because he's getting into things so specific about footprints. And what it really did to me is make me realize I haven't begun to scratch the surface. I had this idea that there was no actual evidence. As it happens, there's tons of evidence. Now, what you do with the evidence is another story. It's another question. Michael Medved. Many of you know Michael Medved, that he has had folks on his show to discuss this. He's on the line now. You've had folks on your show talking about this, and I said I'd love to have you on. What are your thoughts on this? Because you've talked to a lot of people about it, just as I have. I've read about it. It's tremendously compelling.
Well, particularly for those of us who live in the Northwest. I've lived in the Seattle area for 19 years, and you run into people, very, very credible people. For instance, my former producer on the radio show is one of those people who had a very credible Bigfoot, Sasquatch sighting when he was 14. And he was participating in a summer camp at the time. And it was a religious summer camp, and he and another kid were playing hooky in the woods, and they were about 50 feet away, and they were, of course, scared out of their minds.
There is so much evidence that I have never seen. We kind of catch stuff on TV here and there, and that's how we make our decisions about a lot of life. And then it's embarrassing when you're confronted with things that you simply didn't think were possible. But there is a preponderance of evidence to at least suggest that we should take this seriously. And I was saying just before the break, before you came on, Michael, that Jane Goodall, Greg Thornberry and I were astounded to read some of her quotes, that she believes this creature exists in North America. So if Jane Goodall believes it, I've got to say that I ought to at least take it very seriously.
We know, because they take censuses. There are about 40,000 black bears in the state of Washington. And over the last decade, no one has found a bear carcass. Now, how could that possibly be?
Yeah.
No, you don't find a bear carcass in the woods, because if something large dies in the woods, it gets picked apart. There are different animals who come and take care of it.
And crawl off into fixed places when it's dying.
See, this is the kind of thing, again, I just want to say that what has astounded me is what I didn't know. In other words, what you just said completely shuts up people who say, well, how come they didn't find one? When you hear that there are 40,000 bears in that area they've never found, you immediately say, my goodness, I had no idea. I just assumed that obviously there would be, this. We're talking about a much smaller population. If the Sasquatch exists, it's a much smaller
Professor
population.
Krantz, well, I just wanted to, because Michael reminded me in his black bear analogy, one of the main, probably the main objection that skeptics are fond of throwing up is of course they don't exist, because we would find them. We would find their dead bodies. We would hit them with cars. People would hunt and kill them and like this. Well, not only are there many fewer proportionally Sasquatch individuals out there staying hidden than there are black bears, and we hardly ever find a black bear carcass, but Sasquatch, you have to figure, if they exist, are much more aware of the stakes of the game, because they know, being very similar to us, but related also to some unknown primate that we haven't yet identified, they have to know that it would be detrimental to their continued existence to leave bodies lying around. So not only do we have the dynamic of nature, usual nature of large mammals crawling off into thick areas to die and then being eaten by scavengers and microbes, but we also have the fact that these primates exist in family groups, and if one of them is going to die, which is probably a pretty rare event, because you figure gorillas and chimpanzees live just about as long as we do. When one of them is going to die, everybody knows about it, and they're not going to let that carcass be, or that loved one, if you want to call it that, be discovered by the enemy, which is us.
Well, that's now you're taking us into another world. Go ahead. Sorry, Michael.
It doesn't even have to be so conscious. I mean, one of the things that people know about elephants, and one of the reasons people care about elephants, is there was that old legend of the elephant graveyard where it was supposed to be rich in ivory, where elephants go to die. There is evidence that it is quite common for elephants to try to cover, to hide the carcasses of dead elephants.
Well, we're talking about so much here. That's what I love about this subject, is it opens up onto so many areas. The idea that there's a hominid, a creature, whatever it is it an animal? Is it some evolutionary appendix?
It is an animal.
Well, you say it's an animal. Chris seems to think that it's closer to us than that. I mean, it's just... I love the idea.
There are two camps in the Bigfoot research community, and often at each other's throats in different forums. Which one is the ape camp, and one is the human camp. Never the twain shall meet. Because people who feel like I do that these creatures are long time ago hybrids between human beings and some other primate species are not going to be convinced.
And Chris, obviously, you've entered this world of Sasquatch research that most of us don't even know exists. It's fascinating to hear you talk about their different camps that are at each other's throats within the world of Sasquatch research. It's almost funny because most of us don't know that there's a world of Sasquatch research.
It's a hornet's nest when you get into it. Really, in the last 5 years, with the distribution, the advent and the quick dissemination of cell phone cameras all over the place, there is a great frequency. Many of them are quote unquote blob squatches, where you can't make out anything definitive at all. But
they've even got a term for that.
Every few weeks, one will come along that makes you look twice, and most of them remain in the inconclusive category. But then you have a person. There are two excellent analysts. One is Thinker Thunker. That's what he goes by on.
Yeah, we're posting a number of his videos on our website, metaxastalk.com, so you can watch them.
The other man is named M.K. Davis. And if you look in either of those places, those channels on YouTube, you'll find a lot of really high quality analysis.
I have to say, Chris, that one of the most compelling things I saw, and this is where you begin to, at least for me, you sort of pause, because there are two videos I saw where it looks like this creature is picking up like an infant, and it looks just like a gorilla picking up a baby gorilla. It's blurry, but it's clear enough what you're looking at once you kind of get a handle on it, and it makes perfect sense that this creature would in fact reveal itself if there are young around, if it's picking up its young or something. It's sort of there's a vulnerability thing going on there. There's one I thought I saw the other day of these of is it one or two creatures carrying what look like deer carcasses? I guess that's what's said. And then as it's kind of going through, it picks up this what looks like an infant. And you're watching this, you're thinking, this is so complicated and so specific. This is not just some shot of some creature in the distance. It's pretty specific animal activity, and that's what I'm saying is it's so compelling.
Primate behavior.
It's primate behavior. It's what you'd expect.
There's one video that I didn't link you to because I just simply forgot about it because there's too many, and it's from the late '90s. It's called the Memorial Day footage. And if anyone wants to go to YouTube and look,
you're not going to tell me these creatures celebrate a kind of Memorial Day.
No, but this is where a bunch of people are celebrating Memorial Day, and they're at a cookout, and they see a hairy figure running across the field, and they train their video camera, the camcorder back then, and they follow this, and it jumps over a little gully, and then it disappears behind a hill, and when it emerges on the other side, it suddenly grows like 18 inches taller, or like a quarter again as tall as it was before. And it's blurry because it's far away, but you can tell that it is hoisting a small one onto its shoulders. And that's why it came out in the open and made itself vulnerable and exposed itself, is because the baby apparently had crawled away. And even though there were human beings watching, it needed to cross the field and go get that. And then after it picks it up, it's just a few steps into the wood line on the other side of the field, and it disappears, having saved this infant. You're not going to concoct that.
Yeah, it's way too complicated for some hoaxer to have put up. But
I mean, you might, but you're not going to know that these people are going to happen to be there having a cookout.
Let me leap in and say I've read that book, The Mind of Sasquatch, and it is fascinating because it does go a long way toward answering this question. Because everybody has the question: how can it be that this creature could be so elusive? It doesn't make sense. When you read this book, The Mind of Sasquatch, you've done a great job, Chris, in helping us understand possibly the kind of mentality of this creature and why it would be almost as though it's autistic or something and has this strange, we tend to think of we anthropomorphize other creatures, but very, very interesting. So that book is The Mind of Sasquatch.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I think of it as, if it's not autism along how we understand it, I think it's at least somewhere in that direction.
Well, that's a term we can use just to understand what we're talking about. It's just a slightly different way of seeing things.
I'm seeing it through the lens of the autistic savant, who is not only autistic and has all sorts of behavioral traits that Sasquatch seems to share with human autistics, but can also accomplish feats of cognition and memory and perception that go beyond what normal human beings can accomplish. These autistic savants they possess some of the very faculties that Sasquatch would have to possess in order to do what they do.
We've just got another moment here. One of the things I don't want to forget, because you've done some videos on this, is and this ties into what you were just saying, these bizarre structures that you believe these Sasquatch creatures leave in the woods, where they pile large sticks in a way that it looks like a combination of like a poorly made teepee or a kind of a sculpture. It's not a
Blair Witch Project kind of stuff.
And it's just something that you look at it and you say, okay, one thing I know, that didn't happen randomly. Something did that. Something with an intelligence did that. It's like a bird building a nest, but it has no practical value.
I speculate on what these might be, what the reason might be behind these in a new video called "Why All These Stick and Tree Structures."
We're out of time right now. Chris, let me just say thank you. The time flies. This is so fascinating. We want this only to be the beginning of a conversation. We're interested in whatever is. We don't really have a dog in the fight. It's just fascinating. Thank you for being my guest. Thank you, Greg Thornberry.
Thank you.
To be continued. And again, folks, go to Metaxastalk.com. Watch some of these videos. Please check it out. It's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. We'll talk more in future shows.